Hash the photograph in the evidence locker nobody could explain. On the morning of the 14th of October, 1994, the market town of Whitmorbury awoke to fog. It rolled in from the river valley overnight, thickening by dawn until the cobblestones of the old town square glistened damp, and the shop fronts along Church Street emerged from gray murk like ghosts remembering their shapes. The weather would later become a detail investigators returned to again and again, not because it was unusual for an English October, but because it seemed to underscore something about the case that defied explanation. A sense of visibility and invisibility, of things seen and unseen, of evidence that presented itself and then slipped away into mist. Whitmorbury was not the sort of place that expected attention from outside. Population 12,000, a weekly market, a railway station that saw 6 trains a day, a high street with butchers and bakers, and a branch of the county library. The sort of town where neighbors knew each other's business and strangers were remembered. The sort of town, detectives would later reflect, where a young woman could vanish without immediate alarm, because surely she was just visiting her mother, or staying with a friend in the next village, or simply at work, delayed by the fog. That young woman was Catherine Mary Ellison, 26 years old, a staff nurse at St. Jude's Hospital in the neighboring town of Clevedon. She lived alone in a small flat above a newsagent's shop on Mill Lane, a converted Victorian building with a blue door that she had painted herself the previous summer. Her colleagues described her as quiet but warm, a woman who kept her own counsel but who could be relied upon in a crisis. She had been a nurse for 4 years, having trained at the county hospital in Exeter, and she had recently been promoted to junior sister in the emergency department. Her father had died when she was 12, and she had cared for her mother throughout a long illness until her mother's death in 1991. She had no siblings, no boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, and few close friends outside of work. Her life, those who knew her agreed, was orderly and purposeful. She was not the type to vanish. Her absence was noted first by her ward sister, Margaret Halston, on the morning of the 15th. Catherine had not arrived for her shift, had not called to say she was ill or delayed. This was so out of character that Sister Halston called Catherine's flat, then called the hospital administrator, then called the police. By early afternoon, officers were at Mill Lane, knocking on the blue door. They found it locked. They found the lights on inside, a radio playing softly to an empty room. They found Catherine's handbag on the kitchen counter, containing her wallet, her bank cards, her identification. They found a half-drunk cup of tea on the table, still warm. They found no Catherine. The investigation that followed was thorough and methodical, the sort of investigation that defined police work in the years before mobile phones and CCTV on every corner. Detectives from the County Major Crime Unit interviewed everyone who had seen Catherine in the days before her disappearance. They traced her movements backwards from Friday, the 13th of October, the last day anyone definitively saw her alive. A checkout girl at the Tesco on the bypass remembered serving her at approximately 4 in the afternoon. Catherine had bought groceries, bread, milk, eggs, a ready meal for one, a bunch of chrysanthemums. She had been wearing a green wax jacket and carrying a canvas shopping bag with the logo of a charity shop. She had been pleasant, chatty, the girl said, nothing unusual. The newsagent, Mr. Kapoor, whose shop occupied the ground floor of Catherine's building, remembered hearing her come home around 5:30. He had popped his head out to say hello, and she had waved, arms full of shopping bags, mentioning that she was going to watch a film on television that evening. He had not seen her leave the building again, but he often worked late in the back room sorting deliveries and acknowledged he could have missed her. The film she mentioned was on BBC One at 8:15. The television licensing records would later confirm the set in her flat was switched on at 8:12 and off at 10:43. What she watched, nobody could determine, but she had been home, she had been alive, and then she was gone. The search for Catherine Ellison dominated Whitmorbury for weeks. Police divers dragged the river. Dog teams swept the surrounding countryside. Officers walked hedgerows and searched abandoned buildings. A helicopter circled overhead on days when the fog lifted. Her photograph appeared in the local newspaper and on television news programs across the region. Hundreds of tips came in, most of them useless, a few that led to false hopes. A woman in Somerset thought she had seen her at a bus station. A man in Devon reported a body in a ditch that turned out to be a fox. Weeks became months. The investigation continued, then it slowed. Then it remained open but inactive, a file in a cabinet, a case that waited. It was almost a year later, in September of 1995, that a breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A man named Dennis Huxley was arrested in connection with a series of burglaries in the neighboring county. He was not a violent man, the police knew, but he had a long record for property crimes, and he had been caught with stolen jewelry in his possession. During interrogation, Detective Inspector Sarah Warren, who had remained attached to the Ellison case despite its stagnation, asked him, almost as an afterthought, whether he had ever been to Whitmorbury. He had. He had relatives there, he said. He had visited them occasionally. Did he know anything about the missing nurse? The question was speculative. Di Warren had no real reason to connect Huxley to Catherine Ellison. But something in his reaction caught her attention. A flicker, a hesitation, a slight widening of the eyes that experienced detectives learn to read. He said no, he didn't know anything about that, and he stuck to that answer through 3 more hours of questioning. But the reaction haunted Warren. She obtained a warrant to search his mother's house in Whitmorbury, a small terrace on Elm Street that had been in the family for decades. They found nothing relating to Catherine Ellison. They did find, hidden in a loft space behind old suitcases and Christmas decorations, a camera, a Nikon F801, a professional-grade SLR that Dennis Huxley claimed he had bought second-hand years ago. The film inside had been developed, and among the photographs was a series of images that made no sense. They were pictures of Catherine Ellison, not posed photographs, not photographs taken with her knowledge. The angles were wrong for that. They were taken from distance, through windows, from across streets, from positions that suggested surveillance. One showed her leaving the hospital. One showed her walking to the shops. One showed her at the bus stop on the corner of Mill Lane, waiting for the number 47 to Clevedon. The photographs were undated, but forensic analysis of the film and the images suggested they had been taken in the weeks before her disappearance. Perhaps the final weeks of her life. Dennis Huxley denied everything. He said the camera was not his, that the photographs must have been taken by someone else, that he had no idea how they had come to be in his possession. He said he had never spoken to Catherine Ellison, had never followed her, had never seen her except perhaps in passing around town. His mother, when interviewed, said she had not seen him in months and knew nothing about any camera. The case against him was circumstantial. There was no physical evidence linking him to Catherine's disappearance. No body had been found. No confession was forthcoming. He was never charged in connection with her case, and the burglary charges were eventually dropped due to procedural errors. Dennis Huxley walked free and disappeared from Whitmorbury, moving to London according to his mother's account, and was never seen again. But the photographs remained in the evidence locker, and one of them defied explanation. It was the final image on the roll, the last photograph taken. The scene was Catherine's flat, her kitchen, the room where detectives had found her half-drunk tea. The photograph had been taken from outside, through the kitchen window, from the small yard at the back of the building. The window was lit from inside, and Catherine was visible, her back to the camera, standing at the counter. She appeared to be making another cup of tea. It was 9:17 on the 13th of October, 1994, according to the timestamp embedded in the photographic metadata, a detail that would later be verified by forensic audio specialists. It was the last known image of Catherine Ellison alive, but it was not the mystery in the photograph. The mystery was the figure standing in the doorway behind her. A man, visible in the frame, perhaps 2 meters away from Catherine, partially obscured by shadow. His face was turned away from the camera, his features indistinguishable. He was wearing a dark jacket and what appeared to be light-colored trousers. He was standing perfectly still. He was not reaching for her. He was not speaking to her. He was simply watching. Forensic experts enhanced the image repeatedly, adjusting contrast and exposure, attempting to bring out details. They could confirm the figure was male, approximately average height and build. They could confirm he was not Dennis Huxley, whose build and gait did not match. They could not confirm who he was. They could not explain why Catherine appeared unaware of his presence, why there was no sign of disturbance or alarm, why the man in the doorway seemed almost to be waiting for something. The image was run through every facial recognition database available. It was shown to Catherine's colleagues, her neighbors, her mother's surviving friends. Nobody recognized him. The figure remained unknown. In the years that followed, the case of Catherine Ellison became something of a cold case exemplar, studied at police training courses, discussed in true crime forums, examined by criminology students who marveled at the photograph and its impossible subject. Several theories emerged, none proven. Perhaps Dennis Huxley had taken the photograph and the figure was someone else, a second person involved, someone Catherine knew and trusted. Perhaps she had been meeting someone in secret, a relationship she kept hidden from everyone in her careful, private life. Perhaps the man in the doorway was not a threat at all but a visitor she had invited, someone she was expecting, someone who had been with her when she vanished. But there was another detail that troubled investigators, a detail that appeared in no report and was discussed only in whispered corridors at headquarters. When the photograph was first examined, before any enhancements, before the figure was clearly visible, a detective constable named Tom Barrett had glanced at it and said, almost to himself, "That's not right." When asked what he meant, he could not explain it. He said the kitchen looked wrong somehow, the arrangement of objects, the shadows. It took another 6 months before someone understood what Barrett had instinctively recognized. The kitchen in the photograph did not match the kitchen detectives had found when they entered the flat on the 15th of October. A mug that appeared in the evidence photographs was missing from the crime scene. A calendar on the wall in the evidence photographs showed October, but in the photograph from the camera it showed September. The kettle was on the left side of the counter in the evidence photographs, but on the right side in the surveillance photograph. The apartment had been rearranged between the time the photograph was taken and the time the police entered. Someone had been inside the flat after Catherine disappeared, after the photograph was taken, and had changed things. Had waited, perhaps, for the opportunity to return and tidy away something they did not want found. Catherine Ellison was never seen again. No body was ever recovered. No charges were ever brought. Dennis Huxley died in a house fire in Tottenham.